So Dianna, let's start with the department that you work at with Salvation Army. A lot of people familiar with Salvation Army, I think, and we think maybe giving people experiencing homelessness a place to stay or some disaster relief at times. What is the Correctional and Justice Services branch?
Yeah, great question. So it works with the folks who are involved with the correctional and justice system, and be that as in conflict with it, as maybe offenders, but also as having been victimized by some kind of crime as well. And so this would be those, and also family members and those who work within the system too. So all of those who are connected with it in some way. But this is really where it comes into modern slavery and human trafficking, is working with those who are have been victimized by modern slavery and human trafficking.
And oftentimes, so people that find themselves victims of slavery or human trafficking, they also often end up in trouble with the law and things like that, I suppose.
Definitely can be as well. So whether they recognize that they have been victims of modern slavery, human trafficking or not, and sometimes they do, and more often I would say that they don't. But they can be recognized as that by those who are helping them out, whether that's could be law enforcement, right, when they're coming in contact with police, or coming in contact with those that might be helping, whether that's like health services, hospitals, or social services like shelters, all types of things in that way, or even probation officers in that way. So.
Now, you mentioned modern slavery. I think a lot of people, we think, oh, slavery ended when it ended in the United States and the Civil War. And what's the reality of modern slavery, and what does it look like today?
Yeah. So human trafficking, modern slavery would be an umbrella term for human trafficking that would have all types of forms of domestic servitude, trafficking for the purposes of labor, like trafficking for organs, which is something that we really don't think too much would happen, in this day and age, but it does, not only overseas, but also here in Canada.
Wow.
And then sexual exploitation would also probably be the one that here in Winnipeg, we as the Salvation Army would see the most of.
That's such a good point, because you said modern slavery, and in my head, I'm like, well, I'll ask what it is, but I know it doesn't happen in Winnipeg, right? But yeah, human trafficking and being exploited for sexual services, that is slavery, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Exploitation would be is what is at the root of human trafficking. And exploitation is when someone controls someone else through some means of force, fraud, or coercion to then be exploiting them for their own gain. And that's controlling somebody, and that's like slavery in that way. So as much as it's like modern slavery, because we think of that as more historical, but happening around the world, and all forms that I spoke of would be not only somewhere else in the world, but also in Canada and also here in Manitoba.
What's the reality of people that are exploited? Yeah, what's their life like, and what are the challenges that they face?
I think when you ask that question, there's a few things that come to my mind right away. And as I was saying, what we encounter the most as the Salvation Army on a day-to-day basis would be people that aren't recognizing that they're being exploited, because they have been so used for so long that it's become normal. And in some way, over time, that they see that they are themselves are complicit in this, that they thought they did this to themselves, when in actuality, that's not the case. There was, whether it started as an adult or as a youth, somebody else started this, somebody else lured them, somebody else brought them into the exploitation, or exploited them. And so I think on a day-to-day basis, just having someone begin to recognize their worth and their value to community and to God is a huge step, and recognizing that no, they are worth. They're just precious in people's sight, in God's eyes, and also in others too, and to begin to make that transition. So I think, to answer your question, it would be, life is really hard on a daily basis, right? And to reach out to people to ask for help is really hard as well. And so I believe that it is up to us as a community to get involved with understanding what modern slavery, human trafficking can look like in our communities, and do the reaching out, and do the providing safe places and spaces and ways of starting to engage with folks that would be trafficked in some way or exploited in some way, that they can start to identify this.
How can we do that? Maybe whether as individuals or as church communities, how can we start doing some of that? And
lots that's going on. So first, let's just educate ourselves, right? Let's just raise the awareness, like what we have, Day for Freedom, right? So to start to learn about it. There's so much online, so many different places now. It's great compared to what was happening, a decade or so ago. So start to learn about it, get informed. For Salvation Army, we've got some really great resources at salvationist.ca. /trafficking. So that's really one great place to start looking at. And then start to talk about it within our churches and within our communities. Start to have some small groups and brainstorm about what we can do. There are initiatives that are around the city of Winnipeg and in Manitoba. There's different regions all over the province that specifically work on this, not only with our government, but within the faith communities as well. And so seeing how can we get involved in the fight against trafficking in that way.
I can picture it being an uncomfortable conversation to bring up in churches, but it really is so important. And it's a matter of justice, right? And all throughout the scriptures, we see that's what God is concerned about, is justice for people.
Absolutely. And I think it's the least of these. We find, and this is not always the case, I think when we watch movies that have trafficking, slavery in it, it does happen, where people are vulnerable, or even the situations of like kidnapping and all of that. That definitely happens, absolutely. But people are more vulnerable. It tends to happen more too. And so if we can reduce that vulnerability of people, so this is where I think it's so important, like we would all agree that having our anything that we're engaging vulnerable youth in, right? After school clubs, Sunday schools, and we're able to have these conversations with them about not being lured into something that looks really good, that's too good to be true, because it probably is. So having engagement with vulnerable youth and vulnerable adults too. Those are all things I think that definitely God calls us to do.
Yeah, and no surprise to people, I guess, over the years, there's been a big increase of people being lured and coerced happening online. It starts online now often, probably, and need to protect our kids there.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just, we talk a lot about sexual exploitation and trafficking online, but also for other things like labor. Maybe it's in the agricultural industry, it's or the restaurant industry, people trying to do more with less money. And so shortcuts and things like that ultimately result in somebody being exploited, and it's a criminal offense. Like it's wrong on every level. So.
What keeps you going? Why do you do what you do?
I feel called to it, definitely. Many years ago, when somebody was said, "Would you be doing this?" I would be, absolutely not. I'm not equipped to do something like that. And I feel very much that God has equipped me in some way to be able to hear the stories and journey with folks, over the years. And what keeps me going, definitely my faith and my calling and my relationship with Jesus. But I would also say that just these folks who have been exploited and trafficked are the most resilient survivors ever. Like, they are the strongest people I know. And so there's their strength and seeing, what they have endured and how one of the first things I hear after somebody's been able to get out and to heal and to start that journey of restoration is they want to help somebody else get out. Like, almost like all the time, that's the case. And I think that speaks so loudly about that resilience and that strength that is in folks that have experienced this. So definitely, that keeps me going.
You mentioned the website earlier. Are there other ways we can find out more or get involved with what Salvation Army is doing here in Winnipeg and across the province and country?
For sure. So the website, www.salvationist.ca/trafficking. There's lots of information, like learning. There's an MSHT, which Modern Slavery Human Trafficking Response Certificate, to learn about it and learn how to respond to it. That's online. There's also monthly webinars. I would also say, as well as equipping us educationally for this, have this number in your back pocket. If you see something, the other thing is, I think this requires community eyes and ears to be able to see this, right? So if you see something that's wrong and your instincts are saying something is wrong and you're being led, pick up the phone and call the police. If you're not comfortable calling 911, call the police non-emergency number and tell them what you're seeing, that something really here is wrong, whether it's the Winnipeg Police or the RCMP in your area. And then there is a Canadian National Human Trafficking Hotline that we can call. And again, having that number in our back pocket to be able to call ourselves, or maybe we can pass on to somebody that we think that might need some help. So that number is 1-833-900-1010. And so these are some ways we can get involved and to seek out in our communities. There's something here in Manitoba going on in our areas to fight against human trafficking. And so it's just finding those things out.
Day for Freedom, all about bringing awareness, which you've helped us do. It's also about prayer, though. What would be at the top of your prayer list for this issue?
I would say pray for those who are involved in trafficking, and definitely for those who are exploited, who are trafficked, who are being victimized, but also pray for the exploiters and for those who are benefiting from that, and that people who are vulnerable would seek help, being able to reach out, trust, because trust is really hard, right? When our trust has been broken and we're being hurt by people, it's going to be really hard to trust somebody, but that they would reach out to somebody that would be safe, and that we would all be moved by God to find out more and get involved.
Thank you so much, Dianna, for the work that you do and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.